Welcome back to Introduction to Logic. In this video, we're going to be covering section 3.3 from your book, Fallacies of Weak Induction. A fallacy of weak induction occurs because the connection between the premises and conclusion is not strong enough to support the conclusion. As I said before, we're going to be covering a variety of fallacies that fall within different categories. The categories are nice to know, but you don't need to know them for this course. I'm more concerned that you know the actual fallacies themselves. The first fallacy we're going to talk about is the appeal to unqualified authority. This occurs when the speaker uses an authority as evidenced in their argument, when the authority is not really an authority on the facts relevant to the argument. There's an exception here. Appealing to an authority is valid when the authority is actually a legitimate authority on the facts of the argument. So if you bring in a nutritionist to talk about nutrition, that's okay. But if you bring in a nutritionist to talk about the best shoes available, that's not going to work because a nutritionist is not an expert on shoes, they're an expert on nutrition. So our first example here says a commercial claims that a specific brand of cereal is the best way to start the day because athlete Michael Jordan says it is. Since Michael Jordan is an expert on athletics and not on cereal, his endorsement of the cereal doesn't tell us anything beyond the fact that he likes it. Our second example here says that a book argues that global warming is not actually happening, and then cites the research of one environmental scientist who has been studying climate change for several years. This is an appeal to unqualified authority because there are so many qualified authorities that argue the opposite claim. The appeal to unqualified authority is fallacious because they're using experts outside of their area of expertise in order to make it look credible. So a doctor said something, but the doctor is actually speaking outside of their area, so they don't necessarily know what they're talking about. They're using something that looks credible when they're not actually credible. According to repeated nationwide surveys, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Even if that's true that doctors smoke Camels, it doesn't make it healthy. This is trying to imply that because doctors do something, the doctors are endorsing it as healthy, which is not necessarily the case. Marilyn Monroe loves this shampoo, so you will too. Since Marilyn Monroe is an actress, she's not an expert in shampoo or cream, so just because she likes it doesn't say anything about it beyond the fact that you might like it too. Appeal to ignorance. So there are two different ways to have the appeal to ignorance. No one has proved A is true, so it's false. And no one has proved A is false, so it's true. This is a fallacy because it doesn't actually provide any reasons. We don't have any evidence that this is true, so it must not be. That's not a reason. It's just saying I can't find a good reason for this, so there must be no good reason at all. It must be the opposite. And likewise, nobody has proved this is false, so it must be true. Just because I don't have any reasons that it's false doesn't automatically make it true. So here we have a comic where the media is pointing to the evidence that homeschooling is bad, and there isn't any. What more evidence do we need? Homeschoolers are hiding something. In other words, we can't prove homeschooling is bad, so it has to be. No one has proven that Yoda does not exist, so Yoda must exist. Hasty generalization. This occurs when a conclusion about a group of persons or objects is drawn from an unrepresentative sample, especially a sample that is too small or too narrow. This also occurs when there is an assumption that members of a group are more alike than they actually are. For example, no New Yorkers care about their fellow human beings. This is a fallacy because you're making an assumption about a group based on an unrepresentative sample. So you're thinking that things are more alike than they are, and then you're judging them falsely because of it. Her visitor was English, so she was certain of the beverage to offer. This assumes that all English people like tea. Even if most English people like tea, you can't assume that every single English person you meet loves tea. We have two squirrels here, and they're looking at acorns. The squirrel on the left says, "I have never seen food that is not circle-shaped, so all food is therefore circle-shaped." And the squirrel on the right says, "I have never seen food that does not have straight edges. All food, therefore, definitely has straight edges." So just because your worldview is one particular way doesn't mean that everything is going to be like that. The standard racism, sexism remarks also fall under hasty generalizations. Okay, so for false cause, there are a few different ways to commit a false cause. So the first is event Y followed event X, so the person assumes that Y must have caused X. Example, I ate a hamburger, and then an hour later I had a fever, so that hamburger must have caused the fever. The second one states that the arguer assumes that the cause of Y is X when X is not the cause of Y, and the mistake is based on something other than mere temporal success. Whereas in the hamburger example, they're assuming that the hamburger caused the fever because the hamburger came before the fever. In this example, they're assuming that something causes something for some other reason other than time. So the best actors are paid in excess of $1 million, therefore the best way to ensure Simon will become one of the best actors is to raise his salary to at least $1 million. Finally, the third way to commit a false cause is when there are multiple causes for something, but the arguer selects just one cause and represents that one cause as if it were the only cause. Our example here says, the quality of education in our grade schools and high schools has been declining for years. Clearly our teachers just aren't doing their jobs these days. So it might be the case that teachers aren't doing their jobs, and that's one of the reasons why the schools are declining. There's no doubt a variety of other reasons why the school is declining, and likely funding has a lot to do with that. So the false cause fallacy is a fallacy because it's incorrectly assuming that something is the cause of something else when either that thing isn't actually the cause or there's a much bigger story. So it's misrepresenting the facts, or it's getting the picture slightly wrong. Here we have a comic with, I think that's a bear and a dog, and the bear calls the dog a poopy head. The dog looks over and sees a pig smacking a turtle, and the dog says, "Look what you did!" Because the pig smacking the turtle happened after the bear called the dog a poopy head, the dog assumes that it's the bear's fault, even though there's no reason to assume that one thing caused the other. Everybody who went to the moon has eaten chicken. Good grief, chicken makes you go to the moon. After my son had his vaccine, he developed autism. Therefore, the vaccine caused autism. Slippery slope. A slippery slope occurs when someone asserts that a relatively small first step will lead to a chain of related events, culminating in some significant, usually negative effect. This type of argument is often used to scare the person into not taking that first step. So this is a fallacy because you're assuming that one thing will lead to another, which will lead to another, which will lead to another. Even if there is a chance that the first step will lead to the second, and there's a chance that the second step will lead to the third, if the chance is relatively small from step 1 to step 2, and then relatively small from step 2 to step 3, the chance that the overall sequence will happen is very low. So making this seem like it's the guaranteed thing that will happen is very misleading.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
Quick summary. In this video, we covered the appeal to unqualified authority, where the speaker uses somebody who might be an expert in one field to talk about a different field to try to make the second field look legitimate. We talked about the appeal to ignorance, where the claim is there's no proof that something is true, so it has to be false, or there's no proof that something is false, so it must be true. We talked about the hasty generalization, where you take an unrepresentative sample or a sample that's too small and you make a generalization about a group of people or a group of objects. We talked about false cause, where the speaker makes the mistake of thinking that something causes something else, or represents something with multiple causes as only having one cause. And lastly, we covered the slippery slope, which covers a variety of steps, one after the other, and makes the claim that this chain of events is guaranteed to happen, so you should avoid taking that first step. Thank you for watching this video. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email And I posted the Logicola information for this, so if you want practice with fallacies, I highly recommend using Logicola. Talk to you soon.